It all started with a courtroom scene that no one could believe was real. A 14-year-old black girl, quiet and clearly scared, stood in front of a judge, surrounded by officers who had already made her feel like less than a person. These weren't just any officers, they had a history, and not a good one. Stories had followed them, about the way they treated people who looked like her. What happened next took the room by surprise. The judge, stern, and with a tone that silenced the room, gave an order that left everyone stunned. He told the officers to kneel. Yes, asterisk them asterisk. Not the girl, asterisk them asterisk. What had seemed like a moment of power over her flipped on its head in seconds. You could feel the tension shift. The officers looked at each other frozen, unsure if they had heard him right. But the judge didn't flinch. His next words hit even harder and reminded everyone that justice, when done right, speaks louder than bias ever could. As the officers slowly followed the command, the courtroom grew silent. No one dared move. The girl, still shaken, watched as the very people who tried to humiliate her were now the ones facing the weight of their actions. But just when you think the moment reached its peak, something even more unexpected happened, something that left the entire courtroom gasping. So what exactly did the judge say next? And why did it leave everyone in shock? Keep watching to find out. Fought for 7 seconds. Minutes earlier, before the courtroom doors swung open, the story had begun far from the polished wood and bright lights of the bench. Brianna Lewis, an honor roll student who loved sketching sneakers in the margins of her notebooks, was walking home from choir rehearsal when the patrol car rolled up. The officers said they'd received a call about suspicious activity. She was wearing headphones, humming a new melody, and barely heard their command to stop before their hands closed around her backpack straps. Word spread fast through her neighborhood. The same 2 officers had been named in complaints for rough searches and cruel taunts, but nothing had ever stuck. Tonight, though, a passerby caught everything on video. The shouts, the tears, the handcuffs biting into Brianna's wrists for no clear reason. That footage, shaky but crystal clear in its emotion, lit up local news and social feeds. Civil rights lawyers volunteered their time. Parents from Brianna's school held a candlelight walk to the courthouse. Still, no one expected Judge Ramirez to flip the script so boldly. Rumors said he'd grown tired of officers acting above the law. Others whispered he had once watched his own nephew face unfair treatment. Whatever his motive, his single order, kneel, echoed louder than any gavel. Now, with cameras clicking and tension so thick it was hard to breathe, the officers kept their heads down, knees pressing into the cold tile. The judge leaned forward, eyes locked on them, and slowly began to read a sealed document only he had seen. The judge's voice was calm but firm as he began reading from the document, something none of the attorneys, nor even the court clerk, had seen before. It wasn't a sentencing memo or a legal motion. It was a formal complaint filed weeks ago by another family about the same 2 officers. A different black teenager, different neighborhood, but the same pattern: vague accusations, rough treatment, no body cam footage available. The judge paused between lines, letting the silence do the talking. Brianna's mother, seated behind her daughter with clenched fists and tearful eyes, looked toward the officers, finally seeing their confidence crack. Outside the courthouse, protest signs waved in the wind. Some called for police reform, others demanded transparency in the justice system. But inside, the real storm was brewing. One of the officers, Detective Marlowe, shifted nervously. His partner, Officer Green, stared ahead, jaw tight. They'd been here before, but never like this. Whispers in the courtroom suggested more sealed files might follow. Were there other complaints the judge had uncovered? How deep did this go? Meanwhile, Brianna's story took on another layer. Her school counselor had submitted a character letter, describing her as quiet, respectful, and deeply creative. That same day, Brianna had been scheduled to audition for an art scholarship, but instead spent it sitting in a holding cell. The contrast was hard to ignore. The judge closed the document slowly, his expression unreadable. "There is more to this than meets the eye," he said softly. The room froze. No one knew what was coming next. As the judge folded the paper and set it aside, the air in the courtroom grew heavier. Everyone leaned in, waiting. The officers still knelt, the silence dragging out like something was about to snap. Judge Ramirez finally looked up and locked eyes with them. "This is no longer just about protocol," he said, voice steady. "It's about patterns, and those patterns have consequences." Behind him, a bailiff brought forward a thick file, thicker than anyone expected. Pages spilled out, each one stamped with official seals. Witness statements, incident reports, internal reviews. It wasn't just Brianna. It wasn't even just the teen in the sealed complaint. There were at least 4 other names, 4 other moments where something felt wrong, but was buried under vague reports and quiet settlements. The judge didn't say the words out loud, but everyone in that room could feel it. Racial profiling, excessive force, abuse of power. Brianna, still sitting quietly, gripped her mom's hand. She didn't fully understand what was unfolding, but she could tell it wasn't just about her anymore. She wasn't invisible today. She was the center of it. The courtroom buzzed with tension, reporters scribbling in notepads, lawyers exchanging sharp glances. The officers shifted again. Green finally looked up, sweat gathering at his temple. Marlowe, jaw locked, glanced toward the exit, maybe wishing he could vanish. Then the judge reached under the bench and pulled out a second file. This one, marked *confidential*, hadn't been entered into the public record, and what it contained would turn the entire room upside down. The judge placed the confidential file on the bench, then paused, long enough for everyone to feel something big was coming. He looked over the courtroom, his gaze landing on the officers, then on Brianna, and finally on a man sitting quietly in the back row. Most hadn't noticed him when he entered, plain suit, no press badge, not part of Brianna's legal team. But now, all eyes turned as Judge Ramirez spoke his name. "Mr. Allen, would you please step forward?" The man stood slowly. As he approached, whispers rippled across the room. Allen wasn't just a random observer. He was a federal investigator from the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. The confidential file he delivered to the judge just that morning wasn't just a complaint. It was the early findings of a months-long investigation into the local police department, and the 2 officers kneeling before the court. Their names showed up more than any others. A quiet gasp rolled through the courtroom. The judge didn't raise his voice, but his words cut deep. This is no longer just a local matter. There is federal interest, and pending charges may go beyond misconduct. Officer Marlowe's face drained of color. Green opened his mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. Behind them, one of their own commanders stood near the door, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Had he known? Had others helped cover for them? Brianna's mom pulled her daughter in close, both of them barely breathing. Whatever was coming next, it was going to change everything. Judge Ramirez took a breath, then turned to the court with a gravity that made everyone sit straighter. "Based on the evidence presented," he said, "and in coordination with federal authorities, these proceedings will now shift to a pre-indictment review." The words hit like a thunderclap. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The officers, still kneeling, finally stood, shakily, escorted back by deputies, not as enforcers of the law, but as subjects of it. Brianna looked to her mom, unsure what all of it meant, but the way her mother smiled, tired, relieved, proud, told her it was justice. For the first time in weeks, she felt like the fear she'd carried might finally let go. The judge made it clear that not only would the charges against Brianna be dropped, but the department itself would undergo a full civil rights review. The audience stood, some clapping softly, others just holding on to each other. It felt like a moment bigger than the case, bigger than the courtroom. But just as people began to exhale, Judge Ramirez said one final thing that turned the mood again. He tapped the sealed envelope resting beside the confidential file. "There is one more name," he said, "connected to these reports. A senior official who helped suppress complaints, someone inside this very court system." The room froze. Eyes darted between court staff, attorneys, even the bailiff. The judge didn't reveal the name, not yet, but he promised the truth would come out in the next hearing. And just like that, the real storm was only beginning. In the weeks that followed, the courtroom's ripple effect spread far beyond its walls. The Justice Department's civil rights probe moved forward, and both officers, Marlowe and Green, were officially suspended pending investigation. More community members stepped forward with their own stories, and suddenly, a pattern that had once been buried under paperwork and silence was impossible to ignore. The judge kept his word. At the next hearing, he revealed the name of the senior official who had quietly blocked complaints for years. A longtime internal affairs supervisor who resigned the same day the news broke. Brianna returned to school with quiet support from teachers and classmates. Her scholarship audition was rescheduled, and this time she walked into the studio not as a scared teen, but as someone who had faced something much bigger than her and still stood tall. The moment didn't erase the fear she felt, but it gave her something stronger, her voice. Her story became a reminder of what can happen when people speak up, when power is challenged, and when justice actually shows up. Parents across the city started attending school board and town meetings, asking tougher questions. Officers began wearing body cameras more consistently, and the local department agreed to new oversight measures. The system hadn't changed overnight, but something had shifted. And though the courtroom had grown quiet again, the echoes of that day, when a judge made two officers kneel and forced a city to face itself, would not be forgotten.